morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 International Symposium. I'm really glad that you all made the effort to be here today for the kickoff of our International Symposium this year. It will last over the next 2 days, and I look forward to hopefully seeing many of you at some of our other sessions. And just to remind you about our 2 keynote speakers that we have coming up this afternoon, we have the Mexican ambassador to China, former Mexican ambassador to China, and Jorge Guayardo. He will be speaking this afternoon, and very interesting perspective of someone from a different country, Mexico, with an ambassador role in China, and a view of the US, China, and Mexico relationships. So that should be great. And then tomorrow, US Ambassador Ryan Crocker will be delivering our keynote. And he has a wealth of information, been ambassador all across the Middle East in the past, and will be able to address some of the issues around diplomacy going forward. So lots of good things in store. And I welcome everyone, and I'm really glad you're here. Obviously, we can't be in person like we were last year, but we are going to make this the best virtual international symposium there has ever been. So I would like to welcome President Joyce McConnell, who is here with us this morning in order to help kick off our International Symposium and to kick off our starting session this morning, which is Global Engagement in Higher Education. So Joyce, as you know, is proudly leading CSU forward, and we are really glad to have her as a participant in our session. So Joyce, if you'd like to give a welcome to the audience, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'm so happy to be part of the symposium this year and to welcome all of you today to our virtual symposium. We do miss being together, and so we look forward to next year when we'll all be in the same place at the same time. I want to start by just celebrating Colorado State University's rich history of global engagement. It goes back actually informally to the late 19th century, which is really extraordinary. Our first international students began arriving here to take very specific curricula, usually in agriculture or engineering. The courses were rooted in finding ways to address local challenges in Colorado, but that knowledge had applications to similar challenges being faced on the other side of the world. By discovering innovative ways to foster agriculture on the arid plains of northern Colorado, we also were finding solutions that would work for those living in geographically similar areas of around the world. While the phrase had yet to be coined, this could be viewed, and I view it this way, as an early example of how quickly our institution found itself thinking globally while acting locally. Successful global engagement in higher education has its roots in how we build on our institution's strengths and mission. CSU's land grant mission then and now is built on its strengths, applying them to the local, national, and global challenges we face in an ever-changing world. That's an amazing legacy for all of us. A year ago, or more than a year ago, actually, I had the opportunity to travel to Thailand to speak at the Asian Institute of Technology as their keynote speaker. And when I first got the invitation, I couldn't figure out why in the world they were inviting me. I was a new president. I'd only been here 90 days. And it turned out the reason they were inviting me is because as far back as the 1950s, it was CSU water engineering scholars who actually helped start the Asian Institute of Technology, worked with the UN to really bring all of our water technology that we had discovered in Colorado to Asia, to other parts of that were developing, and particularly to the Middle East. So our legacy around water is something that's very, very deep, and we have spread that knowledge very, very broadly. Similarly, today, we've seen that this is true for our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And let's talk about what that means to our students. Our students are really at the core of our mission at CSU. So we have the responsibility to provide each of them with an education that prepares them to be global citizens. We take this really seriously. We want them to be ready to succeed and thrive. And I know this sounds trite because we always say it's an increasingly interconnected world. But this year with the pandemic, I think we really have had that point driven in a way that we would prefer had never happened. But there's no question that we are absolutely interconnected. We are an ecosystem for the planet. And what happens in one place affects another always. And that's why international engagement is essential. It's an essential piece now of our courageous strategic transformation mission statement. At CSU, a global education and the intercultural understanding it creates is not just something nice to have. And it's not just something for those who have the resources to take advantage of its benefits. We have a clear commitment to inclusion and equity. Expanding access to global education is part of that. It's part of our priority as a premier, engaged land-grant institution in the 21st century. And one of our goals of courageous strategic transformation is to really make CSU an exemplar of what it means to be globally engaged. And so this international symposium is so important to just give us a 2 days to pause and think about how critical the work we are doing is critical around the globe, not just in Colorado, particularly around issues like climate change and water and soil, food production, animal health, and of course, disease. And so I want to thank you, Kathleen, so much and your staff for making this international symposium possible. It feels really good in the midst of a year where we haven't been able to travel.
Thank you, Joyce. I appreciate those words. And I wanted to follow up with a question, and you kind of led into it anyway. I know that in previous discussions and things that you've said, you're not a big fan of the term strategic planning because it implies that we plan for something to do later, as opposed to being more action oriented. So you are leading us in the process of courageous strategic transformation, CST. And we're at a point now that there is a framework, a general framework that has been shopped out to campus for feedback, for people to give input. I know it's not final yet, and there's still some more development that will happen. But I was wondering, since you intimated such in your intro remarks, how do you see global engagement and campus internationalization aligning with the courageous strategic transformation of CSU?
That's such a great question, Kathleen. I really appreciate you asking it. CST is or Courageous Strategic Transformation. We're a place of many acronyms. It is something that we're working very, very hard on, and we are rolling that out to campus. As you said, it is a framework. And the reason we're rolling it out as a framework is we really want to incorporate the feedback that we get. And so rather than shop around a finished product and everyone says, oh, well, here's the plan and puts it in a drawer. Now we have an active participation in the transformation process. So I think that that's really important. But centering ourselves in the world, and then understanding that the interconnectedness that we talked about a little bit, and understanding the important role that we can play as an institution, but also the important role our faculty, researchers play, and the important role that our students play in how we engage globally. We have scientists who have worked across continents for years to find treatments and a vaccine for COVID, for example. We have researchers collaborating from just about every country in the world on efforts to address climate change. I want one of those world maps where in the olden days, we would just put pins where everyone was and then put strings. Now we would do it digitally, but I would love to see that all light up of all of the places where we're having an impact. And I think our increasing use of technology, which is one of the positive things that's come out of the pandemic, is we've learned much more about how we can engage across borders and across oceans. And that has, I think, been so important for us. Our leadership team, as I said, is mapping out the framework for the courageous strategic transformation. We're thinking about connectivity in so many different ways. What's been really exciting is to see the level of commitment on the part of the executive leadership team and the deans to really embrace a global perspective. I think that that's been really wonderful for all of us to just say out loud how important it is. So it appears right in our mission statement, right from the very beginning. We know that it will drive our purpose going forward, and we want to work towards a healthy planet and a flourishing humanity. And that doesn't know any boundaries or borders. So thank you so much for asking that question.
You'd think I wouldn't forget about the mute button. Thank you for answering that. And I really appreciate you taking the time to welcome us and to share your thoughts on the courageous strategic transformation. And I know that you're also quite busy, as we all are. So thank you very much. And I'm going to open our panel now on the discussion of global engagement in higher education.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, I have three great panelists from CSU here with me to talk about global engagement in higher education in general and at CSU in particular. So probably faces that you all know, but I'll just do brief introductions anyway. So we have Mary Pedersen, who is our Provost and Executive Vice President. And as Provost and Executive Vice President, Dr. Pedersen is the Chief Academic Officer, in case people don't know what a provost does. So the Chief Academic Officer of CSU, and works in concert with the president, the deans, vice president, and the campus community to strengthen the university's reputation as an internationally recognized land-grant institution of higher education. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
And we also have Alan Rudolph. Alan is the vice president for research at Colorado State University. So Alan leads the entire research enterprise at CSU, and he supports faculty in pursuing their research and funding their research. He also maintains CSU's compliance efforts and research integrity, which is very important as well. So thank you, Alan, for joining us this morning. And finally, I have Blake Naughton. Blake is the Vice President for Engagement and Extension at Colorado State University. He leads CSU's engagement and outreach missions, and he oversees CSU Extension, CSU Online, the Colorado Water Center, and the Office of Community and Economic Development. So thank you, Blake, for being here. So in case you all haven't put this all together, these three people jointly represent the three parts of a tripartite mission of a land-grant university, which is the education piece, Dr. Pedersen, outreach and engagement, Blake Naughton, and research, Alan Rudolph. So this is a great panel to discuss what globalization, especially in a land-grant institution, means. So I guess I will kick it off by saying that I wanted to ask you all, given what we just heard from President McConnell about the courageous strategic transformation framework, what are your internationally focused aspirations and priorities in teaching and learning, research and discovery, and engagement that each of you guide? So why don't I first turn this one to Alan?
Thank you, Kathleen, and thanks for the invitation to join this symposium. It's always a great opportunity to have critical dialogue about globalization on our campus, and really looking forward to the next couple of days. You know, as Joyce said, this last year and a half for us has been a wake-up call in terms of globalization, recognizing that a pathogen, even though when we had the Ebola outbreak in 2014, we now know that within 24 hours, anybody or anything can move from one part of the planet to the next, almost to the entirely opposite part of the planet. And of course, for diseases, whether they're animal, human, or plant, this has presented a challenge over the last 2 decades. And of course, COVID is the first pandemic, although we've had increasing frequencies of outbreaks. And, I mean, the area for CSU is so historic that, even in the founding of this institution, people who moved to this part of the country had to fight off pests in order to establish homes here. So we as an institution have been working on the pestilence and disease side of sustaining healthy lives in our healthy environment for decades and decades since this university was founded. And yet the technologies that we've grown, the intellect that we have, the students that we've trained, positioned us to really, I think, rank as one of the top 10 universities in the world that responded to the COVID response with its research portfolio. And so we are replete with examples of international cooperation. Examples include African swine fever. 2 years before COVID, we had the largest pig pandemic in history. China lost half its pigs. And CSU extension agents and Blake's predecessor, Lou Swanson, was in China forming relationships with Anhui province, the site of African swine fever outbreak in 2018, where we have been working with the Chinese to help build an extension program, which is connected to their agricultural colleges, like in the US. That's just one example of both in animal, in African swine fever and in human disease COVID, where we have international sponsorship from agencies in the UK that are sponsoring large vaccine programs for diseases even before COVID, like Rift Valley fever, which infect cattle and humans all around the world. And in Biomark, as an example, a manufacturing facility that we have on the west side of campus, we have a $15 million funded program out there to produce a vaccine for Rift Valley fever, which is a global health problem. And those faculty and students are working on that. So in the disease category, we've been at international for a long, long time. And it's a really important part of our impacts because pathogens know no boundaries. And as President McConnell said, it's very true in other existential threats that our planet faces. Climate change is another great example. Wildfire smoke knows no borders of states and or countries. Other pollutants know no borders, whether they're perpetrated through water or air or soil. The opportunities to sustain better energy efficiency through soil carbon capture require us to look at the diversity of soils around the world and understand how to mitigate some of the effects of climate change. So the internationalization, I mean, our tagline in research for the last decade has been local discovery and global impacts. And as Joyce pointed to, the research enterprise has tentacles all over the world. And in fact, I think one of the biggest challenges in our courageous strategic transformation is to prioritize. And as we all know, China had been a priority for CSU over the last 5 years before COVID. And we have to re-examine how do we reestablish a relationship with China in a formative way. We can't ignore them or not collaborate on these existential threats. We have investigators that have worked with the Wuhan lab in Wuhan around bat research. So, we have already existing strong international ties, which are so important to coming up with global solutions. And our interdisciplinary passion around teaming has constantly fed that absolutely required globalization of innovation and discovery. Kathleen, you're on mute again.
I know, I just keep doing that. Thank you, Alan. Slick, I want to turn to you and to remind you the question is about internationally focused aspirations and priorities in your area, which would be engagement. What as you think about courageous strategic transformation, does it say to you in terms of the international engagement in your area?
Thanks, Kathleen. I'm really happy to be with the group today. I appreciate the opportunity to come together with this great panel of colleagues. You know, one of the things that we've learned, I think, over the past year is about student mobility and our ability to teach remotely and what that means. And so, of course, I oversee the CSU Extended Campus, including CSU Online. And so I think one of the transformative mindsets I'm going into is how do we expand our missions with our abilities to have students go wherever they need to go and learn wherever they need to do and conduct research wherever they are, and still come back and be connected to the campus in a variety of ways. So very excited about thinking about how we make that easier. Sometimes our systems and the way it works, and students on campus taking online classes, there's different barriers to that, but we can make that a lot easier. We can make it a lot easier for students to enjoy, incredibly enriching experiences as they go abroad or throughout the country or wherever it is that they are going to go, and how that ties in to their learning outcomes and how that ties in to the research that they're working on, undergraduate or graduate level research that our students are involved in. And so I think I get very excited about seeing that. Some of the other things that we've been working on in our transformation is really, to be honest, designing what international extension looks like. So for those that don't know, of course, extension is really thinking hard about Colorado. We're Colorado first, we're at the land grant, we're thinking about the state. But through the years, we've had just a number of incredible opportunities, particularly to help countries that are trying to form an extension system. In most countries, those aren't at universities. They're part of ministries of agriculture or other sort of government agencies. And more and more countries are coming to the US model and sort of saying, oh, this is interesting. Maybe if there's a difference between what a ministry does and what a university does, and that teaching mission and getting informal education out in communities to help primarily rural and agricultural communities, but other countries are sort of waking up to the notion that extension could be embedded in urban areas as well. And so we've had a number of projects through the years that had come and gone, and of course all those kind of ground to the halt in the past year. But to me, I see that as a real reflective opportunity for our own workforce in extension to think about what they could do. Just like we say, I was a kid that did people-to-people science exchange in high school and studied abroad in college and have done a good amount of international work in my career. So I get the transformative nature of that. And we always say that about our students in that work. That's just as true for our professionals. It's just as true for our extension staff to reflect on their own practice as they're out working with those in other countries about the practices of informal learning that comes from a university. So I don't know where that's going, but what's very good about this, I try to find the silver linings of this time, is that we can sit back and think and plan a little bit while we're stuck in me here in my basement and wherever we are instead of traveling. So those are some of the things, Kathleen, I'm looking forward to figure out in the coming transformation framework. Yeah.
Thank you, Blake. I appreciate it. And finally, Provost Pedersen, the question again, internationally focused aspirations and priorities in the teaching and learning mission of Colorado State.
Thank you, Kathleen. And it's a real honor to be here with Alan and Blake joining you on this panel. And I think the real goal for the teaching mission is to integrate it with the research and engagement. And that's really why I really appreciate you having the three of us here together, because we want to be able to connect what the students are learning and their involvement with both research at the undergraduate as well as graduate level and engagement. And so we know that when students are learning and when they see the application of what they're learning to solving real world challenges, not only locally, but globally, they are really inspired and motivated. And so I think one of the things that I'm just so impressed with and excited about this university is its real application to solve these world challenges. And so if you look at our courageous strategic transformational plan, we have a focus on environmental health and the climate, and this includes clean and sustainable energy. And Alan has already highlighted some of our amazing faculty, but when I went through the list of all of the different focus areas, institutes, centers. You know, our CSU Energy Institute, led by Dr. Brian Wilson, is just such an innovative, really leading center for solutions to energy and climate change. And looking at our School of Global Environmental Sustainability, led by Professor Diana Wall, looking at, you know, the links between climate change and soil biodiversity. Alan talked a lot about animal and human health, and I tell you, it is so amazing with our biosecurity level 3 research, and the research, as he mentioned, going on about vaccines for the Rift Valley fever with Dr. Rebecca Kading. We also have wildlife conservation biologist, Professor Joe Berger and Professor George Whitmire, working on the impact of climate change on wildlife. And it's so amazing. And then, of course, another area that I'm extremely passionate about personally, because it's an area that I've worked in, is really global food systems. That's one of my personal passions. And I spent a significant amount of time working on projects in Zambia, Africa, on food systems. And so looking at our researchers here and what they're doing, it's so encouraging. Professor Jan Leach, working on the agroecosystems of sustainability of soils and farming systems worldwide. Professor Todd Gaines, driving force behind the formation of the International Weed Genomics Consortium, which we know is extremely critical and important for crop health and sustainability. And then, of course, our atmospheric science team. We have a CSU team working on tropical meteorology. I wish I could mention everyone, but we have absolutely the most phenomenal. So our focus in the educational realm is to connect it to the curriculum, to provide the interdisciplinary opportunities for students to engage in working with the faculty, and then also to look at our curriculum and say, what's the next major that we need to develop that probably needs to be interdisciplinary, because it requires such a partnership across all these different fields. And so I think that the passion of our faculty and desire to train the leaders, the next leaders for the future, is really aspirational. So our goal is to partner closely and really work together, because we do need to have some key focus areas so we can put our resources in those key areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. Since all of you have touched on COVID, let me turn to another question that I think all of you can also answer. Given that we are still reeling from this pandemic and we're not finished with it yet, what are the challenges and opportunities to further internationalize work in your area, given the realities of COVID? And I do think it has presented lots and lots of challenges, but perhaps some opportunities as well. So Blake, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure. Appreciate the question. I think I heard you say both challenges and opportunities, and I just want to acknowledge, because I know we undoubtedly have a lot of staff in this session, that I think the biggest challenge is making sure that our workforce is okay. First of all, this is really hard for a lot of people for a variety of circumstances. Part of it just being that most of us who work at universities are social beasts and are in it because we like being around people and colleagues and students, and it's difficult to be isolated. That's very difficult, and it's just difficult to do a lot of our work. And of course, a lot of folks in our workforce are dealing with personal circumstances, people who've gotten sick in their families or other sorts of things that make this a very trying time. So I think our biggest challenge is to not press on the gas too hard while we have a workforce that's trying to figure our best path forward. But in the background, what I think some of the big opportunities have emerged. I love that Provost Pedersen mentioned food systems. Early on during COVID, the Commissioner of Agriculture asked us if we could provide some help about food security in Colorado, and we set up a task force chaired by Professor Becca Jablonski and her colleagues Don Thilmany and several other folks who did a terrific job providing data and information and mapping and understanding of where our vulnerabilities within the state around food security were, particularly as supply chain kind of broke down if you recall, the outset. We just didn't know how things were going to get to our grocery stores. And it was a very difficult time. It shows our interdependency, international interdependency as a country, but it also showed our vulnerability that we hadn't really thought through. Well, what happens if part of that breaks? right? And I think that that's really an important opportunity for this university is uniquely situated to bring the kind of analysis, because we bring that together of understanding agriculture and production and international trade with that last mile. How is this getting to mom and dad, and how are they making a nutritious meal for their kiddo at night that's not just processed foods, and how is that honoring producers along the way that are able to keep their farms going. And so we've had a lot of important analysis of that during this time period, and I think this is going to remain an area of emphasis going forward for this university. One of the other things that has emerged during this time, which is kind of coincident to COVID, that is a big opportunity going forward, is our North American Agricultural Alliance, being led by Carrie Wright-Platice, who works with Alan, works at the system office, that will be kind of centered out of Spur. And that's us really thinking with our North American peers in Canada and Mexico, plus a part of an international network of other ag alliances set up by a variety of international agencies that work in a variety of corners of the globe, and being part of that network. How are we thinking about food security as an international issue, which we need to think about? Alan mentioned about African swine fever. When half the pigs die in China, boy, that affects us here in America. We can't pretend that sure doesn't, in health and in the economy of food and all that. And so we're working on what's that going to look like, and how we grow in that area, and how we think of that agricultural alliance as a keystone of our international work, a framework for what we do, so that our extension mission is working in the international sphere in ways that we can be helpful, where we can think about what our value is going forward, and so that when the next pandemic comes around, maybe we'll be a better prepared society. Those are all. Thanks, Kathleen.
Yeah, thank you, Blake. Provost Pedersen, maybe you can address it next in terms of the challenges and opportunities, both that COVID has presented in our teaching and learning mission here.
So I'd like to emphasize what Blake said, that this has been such a tremendous pressure, demand, created a lot of workload and anxiety for our faculty and students. The faculty have been phenomenal at their ability to, remove just in such a short period of time, put their courses remotely and try to figure out how to be the most engaging. We've had so many faculty engaged in our Teaching and Learning Center to learn how to do it better. And so I think that the toll has been hard. And as we know, lack of structure and lack of knowing what is immediately in the future creates a tremendous amount of anxiety. And that's been so real. And so I think that that's been a really challenge. I think for our students, the isolation has been also a tremendous challenge in terms of their not having the normal college community experience. And it's going to be really interesting when our first year students come back this next fall semester, where we're trying to really engage them extensively. They will have had a year of a lot of isolation. I think we have to think about that. How do we bring them back into this culture? So that's going to be a real challenge. I think that the opportunity we have is to realize, and I know Alan would say the same thing, that we're going to have future pandemics. We're not going to get through this and it'll be gone. This is something we need to prepare for. And so we need to prepare for it academically in our teaching mission and think about how are we addressing it as we move forward. It's very important. And I think we have a responsibility to help our students, who will be the leaders, think in that mindset and prepare for it. And I think that what Blake was saying about the whole supply chain, we saw that with COVID. We saw the breakdown in supply chain in terms of supplies being available, even if it was just, test tubes or sometimes just simple little things that would just create a whole breakdown in the system. And it really makes us realize how we are so globally dependent. And so we have to think about how do we address that so that we don't have these vulnerabilities. And so these are some of these large, big challenges that we need to engage our students in working with our faculty and team to really begin to address. And so I think that we've had a lot of challenges, but we have a lot of other opportunities. The one additional item I want to mention is that the pandemic has really put a spotlight on inequities in different areas of race and gender in terms of access to health, access to testing and even the vaccine. And we're seeing that, and we realize this is so important to address. So I would say the good news is that we're talking about it and we're now trying to address it, whereas before it was not focused on very much. So it's put a spotlight on that. And I think it's created a moral responsibility for us to address it. And so I think that's an opportunity that we need to take seriously as our moral imperative.
Thank you. It's a very accurate statement. So thank you for bringing that up. So Alan, let me turn to you in terms of how, with COVID in mind, what are both the challenges and opportunities in the research area?
Well, first, let me also thank Mary and Blake for pointing to the challenges of a culture that I think we can all say we're a bit burnt out, and we're desperately waiting for a shot in our arm and a shot in our lives that propels us out of our basements. So recognizing the mood that we all are in an unprecedented time, the challenge is to remain vigilant and realize that there's a deadly virus still moving around our community that we have to recognize and navigate around. And I'm sure most of us would love to go to a restaurant or a movie theater or a play or anything to get our minds off of it. And it's really challenging. So I want to thank my colleagues for recognize that. And it's true in the research community as well. It's true that we were the first mobilized back into the labs and the first to bring, sort of some semblance of workload back earliest, because it was fairly independent. Research proceeds based on extramural funding. But even there, our researchers aren't working at full capacity or dealing with US agencies that are now myopically dealing with COVID. I mean, I had the fortune of interviewing Secretary Vilsack, or nominated Secretary Vilsack, and his first priority is, of course, getting us out of this unprecedented period, and really concerned about the effects on America, rural America, and so there are some significant challenges. But boy, the opportunity space that this has opened up for CSU researchers and discoverers across so many avenues is phenomenal. And it sort of reflects what I said before. We were so well positioned to move quickly into solutions that we now find ourselves really in a unique position to amplify our impacts in research and innovation. Let me give you a few examples. So there are two pending legislations. A lot of the legislation now is recognizing that interconnectedness that President McConnell talked about. And there's a concept that we know on our campus because we've been talking about it, but legislatively and as a nation, the concept of One Health is really being lifted into the light, because we know the diseases jump from animals. 90% of them jump from bats or pangolins or civet cats. We don't really understand that really well, but we've got a great bench of people who continue to get well funded at NIH and USDA and NSF. So that's going to increase in terms of understanding the very fundamentals of transmission of disease, which learning through this pandemic, we don't even understand how close I can get to you if I'm at risk, right? And whether it's 6 feet, is it 12 feet? Where is the virus going? Is it leaking out of my mask? I mean, there's so many things we don't know that we're going to learn as a result of stimulus money to invest in solutions. A couple of other areas, though, that we've put forward on the national stage. CSU led an effort and is legislating now around a farm bill authorization called Ag-ARDA, the Advanced Research Development Agency for Ag. It's a new unit that's been proposed to take on some of the biggest challenges in One Health within agriculture. And so CSU has been leading a coalition of land grants on the Hill to lobby to get this bill actually appropriated, and that results in opportunity space for our students and faculty. Another example is, you may have read in the paper about ARPA-C, the Advanced Research Projects Agency in Climate. ARPA-C was a concept written up by CSU faculty, and former Governor Bill Ritter submitted to the Biden transition team, which has now found its first $100 million investment within ARPA-E, but they're looking for where do they place a new agency that deals with innovative solutions around climate. And CSU led that sort of strategic white paper to bring that forward within the new administration. A lot of these are still wet clay, but it gives you the sense of the opportunity space that's been created by the vast number of creators and discoverers that we have in our faculty and students. And so these kinds of activities really, I think, represent the opportunity. And as we know, One Health Institute was taken the leadership by Sue Vanderwood, our newest National Academy member. Sue's a big cat virologist, understands the interaction of urban environments with wildlife and how that mitigates disease and some of the challenges that we face there. As you know, we've invested mightily in the Partnership for Air Quality, Climate, and Health, or PATCH, where we've increased our number of faculty around air quality and health because of issues both regionally and globally, whether it's wildfires in Colorado or the transmissibility of disease, or what is really the microbiome content of the cloud or the atmosphere that we live in. So we have an amazing set of opportunities that we've created out of the COVID pandemic, where CSU research that had been working on a lot of these problems for years was able to move. And the reason all of that happened is because of agility. CSU has a passion and entrepreneurial spirit to move quickly to solve problems. And so agility was a big reason why our opportunity space has been created, and quite frankly, part of the solution space we need. And the other word that's being used a lot now in Building Back Better, if you buy those words, is resiliency. We can't afford to have a one bug, one bill approach as we've had in the last 2 decades, where every disease that comes along, we have a Zika bill or an Ebola bill or a COVID bill. Of course, the COVID bill exceeded all of those others by orders of magnitude. Now, some $6 trillion of capital is being deployed to solve this problem. And as Mary said, the question is, will we solve this problem, or will we solve the problem of being resilient to the next pandemic or the next infectious disease outbreak? Whether it's foot and mouth disease that may come across the Mexican border, as Blake said, the North American Agricultural Advisory Network, or the NAN, is a key component of looking at some of those kinds of problems that we know are at our borders. These are real opportunities for us to build resilience, and that's what's desperately needed. And CSU has created a tremendous opportunity space to be a big part of that building back of resilience.
Thank you, Alan. And I wanted to ask one more question that's COVID-based. I know we're getting kind of tired of hearing about COVID, but just one more COVID type question. And because for us in the international realm, I think this has really kind of struck us hard. And I wanted to get your feedback on it. So the pandemic has forced many of us and a lot of just ordinary citizens out in the country to really focus on immediate needs in their homes, in their communities, in their classroom, in their office. How do I stay safe? And within their local community. So think of it as isolationism to an extreme. It's not just the US, it's my house. I'm staying in my house. So how do we convince people, ordinary people, lawmakers, our constituents, our students, that there is value in global engagement when everyone is really focused on personal and local circumstances? So I think I'll turn this one over first to Provost Pedersen.
So Kathleen, thank you. That is such an important question. And one of the things that I have thought about a lot and noticed as an outcome of the pandemic is, even though we're isolated, there's a tremendous amount of connectedness that's happened through the internet, through Teams, through Zoom. And even though we're all sick of it, we've seen that so many more people will engage in town halls or different meetings, and we're actually getting participation at an extremely high level. And I think part of it is because people are isolated and they'll connect in any way they can, right? So one thing is we've seen this connectedness, but what I've noticed is the connectedness has been global, right? I go on and listen to scientists in England and at Johns Hopkins and at UC San Francisco to hear the latest on their research all over the world. And we can do that. We just click a button and we're connected. And we are realizing that not only are we sharing, there's so much scientific sharing that's happening. There's so many platforms because of the intensive research around COVID that have developed, and scientists that are partnering all over the world try to help solve these challenges, right? We're having all the vaccine trials are happening not only in the United States and England, but South Africa and Brazil, all over the world, and we're learning. And so for me, it's created this opportunity to really see how important and valuable that connection is. So even though it's virtually right now, I think it'll open the doors to much more international connectedness. And it just really has made me realize how much we need that global view. So I think it's been amazing. The opportunities for engagement, even though it's remote, it's a level of engagement I've never seen before. So I think it's pretty amazing.
Thank you. And Blake, from your point of view, in terms of not just globally, but also what you oversee within the state of Colorado, how do we encourage people to remain focused, as Provost Pedersen said, outward, as well as having to focus on immediate community and personal needs?
I think that this pandemic demonstrated a humanity and a different definition of community in so many ways. And I think we did this statewide project in our extension system called Grow and Give. And basically it took our master gardeners, which is a bunch of folks that kind of volunteer and help teach other people how to garden, to help people garden more, because people were kind of stuck at home. So they were kind of looking around and, well, I'm going to play in the dirt this season and see what I can grow. And turns out they had extra food, and turns out we could connect that to food banks and to food systems. And so that the vulnerable who weren't getting enough food, suddenly, I can't even tell you the tens of thousands of pounds of food that were donated, all from this. It comes out of the effort that Extension started, and people may not know their history to know that the original victory gardens during the World Wars were started by Extension systems across the country to help in the war effort. And so we have a history of this. We have a history of coming together during crises. And to me, that just redefines what community is. And so sometimes that community is your neighborhood because you can't go anywhere else. Sometimes that community is a little bit larger and where you're helping a food network. And then sometimes we really realize that community is much bigger. I really like what Alan was saying about resilience. We're learning that we have some vulnerabilities in our communities, and that they are, to be resilient, we have to think about their interconnectedness. That long gone are the days of everything that happens in our county can be sustained and everything that's here, and that's all we need. That just isn't how it works anymore. And so I've just been encouraged by that. And I've seen within our workforce, Kathleen, a lot of folks really thinking about, okay, my job is to bring the university to my community, but it's also to bring the world to my community and to a knowledge base and to translate that, because they sat at home for a year and they've been Googling things, and our job is to interpret data and to help them understand and to get through the noise of all that stuff that's online to what's really helpful in their lives and communities, and how to bring that together. The last thing I'll share that I think is really pertinent to this question is we had we're in the middle of a needs assessment statewide, and we're also recently met with the board of governors of the university. And what's coming up over and over again is a lot of conversation about dialogue across difference. Even when we're talking about our rural areas who are now experiencing an influx of people moving to their communities from all over the world, because if you're going to work remotely, come to Colorado. It's kind of nice, you know, you can work from here and do a lot of things. And as we think about the diversity in our communities and think about people coming together with a sincerity that I'm really encouraged by, people are saying, well, how am I a good neighbor to my diverse community? How does our community work when there's a lot of difference within it? And the lessons from that come from our international work and travel and understanding and building understanding for that work. So I'm seeing it again and again in corners of the state where you wouldn't expect it, that definition of community and building and bridging difference is so really, really important. So again, trying to find silver linings in this pandemic along the way.
Mm-hmm. And Alan, thinking about the research side, I don't think there's any doubt that our researchers themselves still remain focused on solving solutions, which means having a global and a wider perspective. But how do you translate that into meaningful reality for people out in the communities who are focused on the local?
Yeah, and you know, I think you really have brought up a really important point, Kathleen, about, you know, post-COVID, how long will it take And will we come back to the same level of global travel that we had around our mission? Because as Mary said, we've effectively learned, oh, we can link up and learn internationally through MS Teams and Zoom like we never had to before because we had to. And now it'll be interesting to see, I would get on planes and go to China for a day or two and come back. And the question is, do you need to do that anymore? Can you have international relationships and sustain them in new ways? And I think that's going to be a challenge. I think we're going to need to be intentionally proactive. And I'll suggest a couple of areas we're looking at. When I say not just our office, but the institution. And one of them is in international graduate students or graduate research associates. This university, under the leadership of Mary Stromberg and the dean of the College of Graduate School, is really focused on growing that. And I think certainly the pandemic, we've taken a hit, of course, on international grad students, but the graduate research associates and the international graduate students are an engine of potential opportunity to bring back a strong interconnectedness with our global community. The second one, and I'm mindful of what people are dropping into the Q&A, CSU used to have a very strong USAID portfolio, and currently we don't. And one of the reasons is that in order to really engage with agency like USAID, you need an infrastructure of administration. A lot of the AID funds are pass-through funds, so you're funding a lot of other countries in collaboration. And frankly, we've got a culture that likes to roll up their sleeves and do rather than manage. And so we've got to build a bench, though, that really effectively can handle those kinds of international programs. Look at Kansas State. They have 4 innovation laboratories with AID, and they do so because they have a half a dozen people who do nothing but all of the sausage grinding associated with making those programs work well. So, there are some focused ways that we could look at bringing back globalization onto our campus from the research perspective. One of them, and I think this is broad, so it's not just about the STEM fields, it's about humanities fields, but I do think through postgraduate investments intentionally angled at internationalization, this is one way to push that lever. And, there's going to be a hunger for that. And so, as Kathleen knows, we're having some discussions with some India universities about expanding our portfolio into India around important things in food and agriculture and climate. And, they have many of the same issues, of course, we do with large cities and pollution and air quality like we do with wildfires here. So, and building that bench around AID, I think this is really what Carrie Wright-Platice is doing around ag, and we're looking at with Fort Collins campus as well, as to how can we be more competitive on some of these large international opportunities in which we really need to build up some infrastructure in order to do that. And I think it's a great time to do that. The last thing I'd say is that a lot of universities are looking at their graduate programs and pruning right now because of the the downturn in enrollment. There are going to be a lot of very skilled, talented graduate students available for those who can find the resources and the priority to invest in them.
Thank you, Alan. As my last question, I would like to ask all of you all, as I said at the beginning, you're a particularly chosen panel representing the 3 missions of the land-grant mission of a university: teaching, research, engagement. So I think typically as universities get larger and larger, they tend to get siloed, and it takes an actual conscious effort to break down silos and to work interdisciplinary and to work across the different organizational entities at a big university like CSU. So thinking of the areas that each of you represent, how do you see your areas can work together in the international area to advance CSU's global reach? And Mary, I'm going to start with you.
So I love that question, Kathleen. I think that is a real opportunity and a challenge that we need to identify how we can do that for international programs. I think that looking at all of our colleges, including liberal arts in the area of social sciences, we have faculty that are working in environmental economics and filmmaking and other areas. I think the challenge, and this is one of the things that the deans are all working on right now, is to see how we can partner with different expertise to address specific problems. So it really requires bringing everyone together and having a conversation. So for example, a good example right now is we're developing an undergraduate degree, in sustainability, and the interest spans every single college. And it's international. It's work in Africa and China and the Antarctica, all over the world. And so coming together and partnering and say, how can we do this together so that we are working together? And I will tell you, that is a challenge. And it's been one of the challenges I've seen in the academic environment, because people are concerned about, resources and finances, and where does the money flow and where do the credits go? And so what we have to do is be able to address those challenges. And I know that the structure, there's a lot of opportunities right now with different centers and institutes and special academic units. And that's one thing we're really looking at right now, is how do we make sure that we have that opportunity to bring faculty from different departments together to provide the educational platform that partners. And so I would say that this is probably one of the top areas that I'm hoping to really address with all of our leaders to see how we can do this better. So I don't have real specific answers, except to say that it's really important. It's the future, and we need to figure out a way to make it work well for everyone.
Thank you. Alan, your 2 cents on this topic.
Yeah, when you asked the question, it's a great question. I think, as Mary said, our resourcing on this campus is so decentralized that it's sort of, I think, a big reason why we're already so collaborative, right? Is nobody can really pull something off on their own. They have to collaborate to find the resources and the energy to work together. So, we're really well positioned to do this. And yet, stovepipes exist in any large organization. I really enjoyed a few years ago, Kathleen, we had sort of lunch and learns around countries or regions of the world where we brought people together into the union for a lunch we sponsored between our units, VPR and your unit, we would do India, and we'd invite all the faculty working in India. What, I think all of this starts with is awareness, right, of who's working and what and doing what. As Mary mentioned, mapping. I mean, I think when we take these themes in the courageous strategic transformation, we hold them up to see what we're already doing. We're going to see that we have a tremendous amount of assets already, and then we're going to be left with how do we reformulate these to get even greater impact. And that is to your point about, if I give up something, are we giving up something to get something even bigger around impacts or ways that we can make our discoveries and trainings really impactful in the world around us. I do think we need, the one thing that this university will be facing going forward is priority. Because if we really are going to take that next step to try to gain escape velocity, we may have to decide, well, we'll work on these 3 things, these 3 countries in the next 2 or 3 years, and these regions afterwards. I mean, I think one of the challenges in the academy, I'm a first-time academic, is that we have a license of freedom, intellectual freedom. Our faculty are welcome to pursue whatever opportunities they can find. Yet if we can convince them there's a greater opportunity to come together and work together on some of these things, I think our impacts could be dramatically increased. And I will tell you, as the chief research officer of this university, I look forward to the day where you go out into the world and you talk about CSU, and sometimes you hear, well, I had no idea CSU were doing that. Other times I walked into Chennai, India, to their National Institute on Research and Tuberculosis, one of the largest in the world. I sit down there and they say, thank you. And I say, well, what are you thanking me for? Colorado State has provided them for the last decade with standard reagents for doing their TB research that come out of our Fort Collins, the west side of campus, where our infectious disease prowess globally has been recognized. And we provide TB reagents all around the world. And so, we already are making some really profound global impacts. And yet the courageous strategic transformation process is really asking us, as you say, how do we break down some of these silos to even get greater impacts?
Thank you. And Blake, thinking about the extension mission of a land grant mission, of the tripartite mission, so much of what people think of as extension in terms of, or as engagement, they think of extension, so out in the counties, or maybe CSU online, so out in the ether somewhere, and not necessarily here and integrated with the rest of what we do. How do you bring that forward, especially in the area of global engagement?
I appreciate it. When I listen to both Mary and Alan talk about all the great stuff our faculty and students are doing, which is just incredible every time you start listing these things. The TB reagents around the world, like who knew that even happened? I feel like that our part of the mission is helping the framework of how that gets out around the world. Like, what's that mean? And one of the reasons I came to Colorado State a year ago, to be very honest with you, because there's differences in land grants and there's differences in that approach, is that engaged approach. And what that really means to me is that that's a respectful approach where you co-create with people. You don't just push and sit, in the ivory tower and say, here, you're welcome, you get all of our knowledge. But you say, we want to come together and we want to figure out how we make that research project together, whether in community or in industry. We want to make this teaching experience together so that the student is learning from humanities lens and cultural difference, or whatever that is. And so to me, in that lens of engagement in the international sphere is ensuring that we take that approach when we go abroad, whether that's faculty going abroad for research, whether that's extension folks going abroad to work with those systems, or whether it's students going abroad to learn. And I'm sure your office espouses those principles of we don't just go with the ego of we're from CSU or America and here we are and you're welcome, but that we're here to learn from you too, that we're here to come together, and that spans the mission. So what I really like about what our Provost Council of Engagement has done, and a few years ago they created the Continuum of Engaged Scholarship, is they really didn't put engagement in that separate silo. They said engagement is a way of doing teaching, it's a way of doing research, it's a way of doing service and extension. And also here's some markers of what it looks like when it's going well. And so let's hold ourselves to that. Let's be honest about that, and let's try to get toward that as it looks like. So, I get excited about how we can work with your office and the international programs that come through you to ensure that there's a partnership in ensuring that we live up to that value of the university, of that co-creation and respect and dialogue with wherever we are in the world. Yeah.
Thank you very much, all three of you. And as I expected, the conversation today has engendered quite a few questions from our audience participants. So I thought I would just ask them and see who would like to take it on. So our first question, because we focus a lot on COVID and the pandemic, we've heard a lot about the STEM fields, about the research in STEM, and about our resilience in the science, technology, education, math fields. What is the role of humanities and social science in the future of internationalization at CSU?
I'll unmute first and have Provost Pedersen, do you want to?
Yeah, I can jump in there. I mean, I think the role of humanities in terms of not only communication, but social justice, equity. I think we have a role in the arts and humanities are areas that promote critical thinking as well as our philosophy. Those are things that are foundational skills. And I think that as we work globally, those are things that we need to develop to have a better understanding with our global community. And so they actually are not only just as important, I think they're foundational. And I think that's something that we need to make sure that we do articulate. And I'm really appreciative that question came up, because, having respectful dialogue, having civic engagement, being civic mindedness, but being globally minded are all areas that I think we have a responsibility to weave into our educational mission for our students. And so I think there's a tremendously important area. And then what's so exciting is to look at the bridging. We have a new PhD program in music therapy that actually bridges the creative side of music and the artistic with neurological development. And so that's cutting edge. I mean, that is so exciting. And so not only are there the foundational pieces, but then there's the connectedness. And so we do have a lot of faculty in our liberal arts areas and social sciences that are very engaged in global work.
Thank you. And Blake, you were going to jump in?
Just quickly, I think we learned that STEM doesn't work without communities and understanding, right? I think we learned during this that we might not have enough trust of our social institutions that are trying to put out cures and guidance for those to be really effective. I think Dean Withers in particular is thinking hard with his faculties from the College of Liberal Arts, how we think about the ways that we help shore up our civic institutions. And that by that, I mean both our governments, but our civic clubs and social service clubs and our churches or whatever. You can track the growth and diminishment of communities in America, and I've seen some research on this, by the growth and fall of civic institutions in those small towns. And when there's not trust, it's not there. So I think it's a great question of how we wed those together in order for, I listened to Alan's great science, and boy, do we have the right vice president for research at the right time, because he knows about disease and all of this. And we've got to get it so that we have a society that can listen to Alan and trust that CSU is there to try to be a partner in helping.
Yeah, thanks. Mary and Blake brought up some great points. And I think this is a really important point that we can't lose in terms of, as we sort of come out of the COVID, we've learned so much in science, on the hard sciences side has led, what's the virus? Where does it go? Do I need to be tested? What's the vaccine do? This is all medicine, but behind it all are behaviors, right? Whether I'm going to adopt any of these behaviors, do I believe what they're telling me? And that is trust, as Blake said. There's another side to this that Mary points to as well that I think is important. That's really about balancing. Who are we, and what makes us unique, and the fact that arts and humanities are such an important part of our mental health. And mental health is the other existential threat we face. We have unprecedented and unacceptable suicide rates in our young population. We have a stress in our society now that, if we don't address, is really causing a lot of both economic burden as well as personal burden on families at home, as well as in communities. And I think a lot of this goes back to the arts and humanities in terms of trying to understand the balance in our lives, how important it is to appreciate the beauty of what's around us, as well as the science. And, I think in our office, we're often challenged because, a lot of it is driven by the financials of people going out, and the STEM disciplines, as are resourced differently, because it costs a lot more money to produce a vaccine than perhaps a poem. But the reality is that the poem can be as impactful as the vaccine in curing people or helping people in that balance of life.
So true. And thank you, Alan. I think we only have time for one more question. This one's mostly focused at Alan, but I think it might be useful to think of it in broader terms with Blake and Mary as well. So you mentioned in your remarks earlier about the USAID. And in a recent essay in Foreign Affairs, USAID's new administrator, Samantha Power, did signal a greater interest in funding higher ed projects. But as you mentioned, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. You can't really compete for projects if you don't have the bench, if you're not equipped to deliver on what you're applying for. So in general, I think particularly in a pandemic environment in which we're really budget constrained and resource constrained, and again, both of the others can chime in as well. How does CSU get the resources it needs to even be competitive for some of these things that you have to have bench strength to start with?
Wow, that's a really tough question, because you're asking about how do we get resources. I mean, I think this is where, in the courageous strategic transformation process, one of the things obviously we did a lot of listening before putting that draft out. And one of the top things we heard was we need a resource plan on this university that's more transparent in terms of understanding where are the base investments, and then allowing us to make some tough choices about, do we want to reallocate priorities of those funds into building the kind of infrastructure that you point to? Because you're right. I mean, can we find those resources? I think we can. That's why I keep using the word priority. I think part of the interesting window we're in is, as a community, can we come together and agree on certainly the top level words that define us, that give us meaning, that give us purpose, that give us action. But when it comes down to resourcing priorities to accomplish those things, this is where we roll up our sleeves and implement a transformative strategic plan, which oftentimes is far harder than creating one. So I don't have the answer to your question about where those resources are, but know that the success, if we were to prioritize in an internationalization investment, the building of USAID opportunity space, we would need to find the money to build that infrastructure to do that, because so far we've not been successful in trying to do it without it. And I think the other thing about AID in the period we're coming in is there will be a change in looking at how we do this, and we'd like to be part of that change.
Thank you. Provost Pedersen?
I'd just like to add on, since I've worked in this arena a little bit, that a lot of the opportunity that I've seen for USAID is those partnerships on the ground in the developing countries. And so I think that we have a lot of faculty that are working in globally in those countries. And so I think it's looking to where we can build on top of those partnerships, because a lot of times it takes developing the political ties within that country with the operations officer who's overseeing the work, because they usually have a very significant influence on determining who gets selected for projects. So it requires that relationship building on the ground also. So that's a really important piece of it, not only demonstrating that you have the capacity, but that you actually are on the ground working there and know what it's going to take. And it requires that real two-way learning, as Blake was really focusing on, that, we need to learn in the country what are the approaches that we can help to solve it, but within their framework. It's not just our solution. So I think that partnership on the ground is really important.
And Blake?
And I'll just route it out. If we talk about capacity and you talk about relationship, I think the third leg of resource generation in whatever it's formed, whether it's USAID or others, is understanding your value. And for us to really be able to articulate that, and I think that's a piece of this courageous strategic transformation process. We aren't everything. We are a lot of really incredible things. And where you have value, people will pay. And that is my simple mantra. And this is what I tell our folks in Extension all the time. And sometimes that's the actual end customer. Sometimes that's an agency or grant funder or whatever. But if you're able to articulate that, you have the relationships to validate that and the capacity to actually follow through, then it's going to come through for us. And I think we just need to come together as a university to actually better articulate all of those things so that we can help our faculty to be more successful in those spheres.
Thank you. And thank all three of my panelists and all of the audience for participating today. It's been a fascinating discussion. And although, like Ellen said, we might be operating from our basements, I do have optimism that things are looking better. And this has been quite an engaging conversation despite the limitations of Zoom, and I look forward to being able to do it again in person. So thank all three of you for participating today.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you,
Kathleen, and for your leadership as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.